Hi, my name is Carlos Mendiola, and I'm going to expose the topic of the Cold War. But first of all, we're going to see what the term Cold War refers to. The term Cold War refers to the conflict between the two world powers that dominated the war after the World War II. These both were the United States and the Soviet Union, respectively. During this period, this period lasted from the decade of the 40s to approximately 1989 or 1991. And the term cold is because this conflict between these two nations never provoked an open military conflict that could be named as a real war with military mobilization. So, uh, before another thing, we need to explain some things about the differences between the United States and the Soviet Union. This conflict began because of the difference of interests between the capitalist bloc and the socialist one. The capitalism had its origin in England and France and emerged the idea of the work for a capital or a pay. Adam Smith published his ideas, which suggested the separation of the government and the private ownership and encouraged the expansion of this economic current. On the other hand, the socialism economic current had its origin with the Marxist ideology proposed by Karl Marx in Germany, which criticized the private ownership of the means of production and the exploitation of the workers in this area. Later, in 1917, this economic current was implemented in Russia by Vladimir Ulyanov, alias Lenin. These two ways of carrying a country's economy always had shocks because of the differences they found in themselves. The capitalist bloc was founded in the concept of liberty, democracy, private property, and consumerism. And in the other hand, the communist bloc, however, was based on discipline, economic control, social equality, and community. At the end of the story, these differences made out all the conflict that englobed the Cold War. To gather more information about this topic, I made an interview to my father, Carlos Mendiola. He is 43 years old, and he can give us more information about how this period was lived, what the people talked about this period. So I made him 5 questions to gather more information about this topic. The first question is, what countries were the world leaders during this period? And his answer was the United States and the Soviet Union because of their technological advance and their advances in military armament. The second question was, why did countries who were allies during the wars become enemies afterwards? He answered, personally, I think because of the differences of interest they both had, and also because they both wanted to demonstrate the other that they had better technology, and this could be expressed in better military armament or better defenses if a war began. The third question was, where did the Cold War take place? He answered, I think that the real Cold War was all the social revolutions that emerged during this period, like the one in Korea, in Vietnam, and the one in Cuba. The fourth question was, what opinion did the general public have of the Cold War? I think they felt fear and uncertainty because they didn't really know what could happen. And the last question, what type of weapons did the two world powers have at their disposal? Especially the nuclear armament were the most feared and memorized weapons of this period, a complete civilization destroyer in his opinion. After all these opinions about the Cold War, now I am going to do a general description and to say some important dates of the Cold War. So the Cold War began after the World War II. Germany, or the German territory, was divided between a capitalist bloc and a socialist one. And because of the differences of interest between these two blocks, they built a wall between them, called the Berlin Wall. So, because of the advanced technology these both nations had, in the pursuit of obtaining this prestige and influence, the United States and the Soviet Union launched their own personal international agendas, to say it in a way, forming alliances with other countries and consolidating their spheres of influence. The United States established principal alliances in the Western Europe with France, Great Britain, Italy, the Francos, Spain, Scandinavian countries, etc. And in Latin America with Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and the Pacific Asia, with Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. On the other hand, the Soviet Union found allied governments in Eastern Europe with Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Bulgaria, and Hungary. It also promoted the establishment of communism governments by means of financing guerrilla armies, political parties, and revolutionary movements such as in China, Cuba, Angola, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Vietnam, and North Korea, amongst others. Later, the Soviet Union promoted these socialist ideas in the countries which had leaders which wanted to change the ideas of their government, and those confrontations are known as the proxy wars, the conflicts that originated with contrasting ideologies that each nation intended to spread through various corners of the planet. So, the most noted of these wars, and the ones with the greatest of the consequences, took place in Korea between 1950 and 1953, and Vietnam between 1959 and 1975. The Korean War was a direct sequel to the World War II, in which the Korean Peninsula was divided between the United States, that is South Korea, and the Soviet Union in North Korea. Lack of the consensus amongst both nations, as well as both Koreans failing to reunite under its own economic and political system, led to the peak of the war. The war was practically stalemated, with little to no advances or victories for 3 years, for which an armistice was signed. Reunification was deemed impossible, and up to today, Korea remains divided. Vietnam was a case similar to Korea, where the country found itself divided into a northern communist region and a southern capitalist one. In 1959, the conflict saw its peak and resulted in something tremendously violent and with an exceptionally high mortality rate that claimed 1 million lives. Despite subsidies and aid from the United States, South Vietnam lost the war, and in 1975 the entire country underwent reunification under a communist government that was aligned with the Soviet Union. This event was most likely the greatest defeat suffered by the United States during the Cold War. Perhaps the most critical moment of the Cold War was in October of 1962, in what it is mostly common known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was the 15th of October of 1962 when the United States learned that the Soviet Union had installed military outposts armed with a nuclear arsenal in the island of Cuba. The President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, immediately reacted, demanding the withdrawal of these military installations. 3 days later, on October 28th, the Soviet Union gave in to the pressure and decommissioned these installations, avoiding what could have most likely turned it into a Third World War. The United Nations took an important role during this period in the arbitration and the moderation between the nations, effectively helping to avoid reaching a peak that would lead to a Third World War. Later, both countries began a space exploration career to demonstrate the other country the technological advance and the better military armament. The most memorized things happening during this period was the putting to orbit of the first satellite by the Soviet Union, called as the Sputnik 1, and the travel of the man into the moon by the United States. So this is all from the development and the beginning of the Cold War. I'm Carlos Mendiola, and I hope this information could help you.